There is a loss of life. It is tragic. We take it seriously regardless of the circumstances. And it is important, though, to recognize that our primary objective of the police department is always public safety, making sure that the safety of our residents is intact. And it's followed close secondary by welfare of our police department and making sure that they act accordingly and are safe as well. Currently, the tragic shooting yesterday is under review with the Attorney General's office, but I have reviewed the footage, and we would urge the Attorney General to expedite his review and release the footage as quickly as possible. We do feel that the use of force yesterday was justified based on the circumstances and in line with police department training. I want to be clear on some of the circumstances surrounding the call yesterday. At approximately 2:20 yesterday, the call came to the police department from the Jersey City Medical Center that was already on the scene, and they felt it was unsafe to enter or to engage with Mr. Washington directly at that time. About 8 minutes later, the Jersey City Police Department arrived at the scene directly and followed protocols for nearly an hour of engaging with Mr. Washington. And at the point of 3:30, where they felt that he may do harm to himself or potentially somebody else inside the apartment, they entered and they were charged by Mr. Washington with a knife in hand, and they used force, deploying both a firearm and a taser. Everything prior to that was in line with communications that was taught at the Jersey City Police Department and de-escalation training that those officers have both undergone. So again, we want to be clear with the circumstances that while tragic, we do feel that those police officers acted properly, and we want the public to know that. I'm going to turn it over to Director Shea for a more detailed description of the circumstances, and then we'll open it up for any questions or comments.
Yeah, good morning. The mayor covered pretty much everything. The only thing I'll add, the officers who were interacting with Mr. Washington, and we all feel our heart goes out to his family today, of course, who have lost a loved one, and for his loss. But the officers who interacted were from our emergency service unit. The original call came in from the EMTs at the scene. They said the scene is not safe. They need police before they'll interact with Mr. Washington. The original officers called for emergency service, who are specifically trained and equipped and act as a team to deal with people in emotional crisis. They arrived, and then it played out as the mayor expressed. I've also viewed the body camera footage, and I also believe that when the investigation is complete, it will be within the Attorney General guidelines and the use of force guidelines. Unfortunately, that won't bring Mr. Washington back, and we all wish it had ended differently. With that, I guess we'll take questions.
Yeah, any questions specifically? Yes.
Good morning.
won't give specifics around the knife at this time. I will defer to the Attorney General with his investigation. However, the body camera and the footage from the officers, both officers at the door, are very, very clear. They breached the door. The individual then charges at them is very clear as well. And then, as I said, they deployed both the taser and the firearm. So I think it was pretty clear, and where the shots were fired were pretty much in the doorway at that point from him charging. So they were in close proximity to the police officers by the time they opened the door. That's pretty clear from the footage. And that's the reason why I say that releasing that footage from the Attorney General sooner rather than later would be in the public's best interest.
Do the training? Yeah. Yeah, the knife, again, the investigation is being done by an independent agency, the Attorney General. They're in possession of all the evidence. However, from what I saw on the body camera, described as a 6 to 8 inch blade kitchen knife. As far as the training, our emergency service unit, just like New York, just like Port Authority, everyone else, they have specialized training to deal with emotionally disturbed persons as a team. That includes de-escalation, psychiatric training, recognition of mental illness, how to establish rapport and de-escalate people and mentally ill. Both of these officers have been members of the two that were on the landing. Both have been and were interacting with Mr. Washington. Both have been members of the team for several years. Both have, in addition to their training here in New Jersey, attended the full 8-month New York City emergency service training, which includes complete and extensive training and on dealing with emotionally disturbed people and psychiatric disorders. Because unfortunately, these jobs are inherently dangerous, which is why the police are there. I'll stress again, medical people had arrived first. They had determined that they could not safely interact with Mr. Washington based on his behavior. He has an extensive history of danger. We do our best. The officers deployed less lethal devices. They employed protective devices. They operated as a team. They they followed instructions from supervisors. They secured the door so he couldn't surprise them. After an hour, what appears to me, when our supervisors were afraid somebody may be in medical distress in the apartment, they opened the door. I think it's important to mention they never entered. They never entered the apartment. All they did was open the door to see if they could see somebody hurt or bleeding, including Mr. Washington, inside the apartment. He then immediately rushed out. If we did it 1,000, these officers, a couple statistics, and they don't help when it's your family member, but in 2022, which is the most recent year we have available, we handled, and that's that unit, handled 1,868 calls for emotionally disturbed person. We only had to use any type of force 41 times. Only 3 suspects received any type of injury from those almost 2,000 calls. And 5 of our officers were injured trying to bring them under control. I mean, these people are, Mr. Washington is sick. He's not bad, he's not evil, he was sick. But that didn't make him any less dangerous, unfortunately, to those officers at that time, and they had to take what reasonable steps they could to protect themselves. We all wish it had ended differently. Yes? To my knowledge, it depends who they call, but if they call the crisis center or if a family member calls, then the medical personnel evaluate whether they can go safely or whether they need the police to secure the scene first. I believe they base that on prior history of interactions with the person, what they know about what's happening right now, the rationality of the person they're dealing with. Again, with Mr. Washington, we have a history of over a decade. We arrive if we are called. Now, if the family calls into 911, we respond immediately. Yeah, no, they decide whether or not the police are necessary. You want to? Sure.
In 2011, correct? 2011, he had an interaction with the police again, and I think it speaks to the fact that he had a violent history with the police department here in Jersey City and some familiarity. I think Director Shea said it accurately that he was sick and mental and psychological issues. And I'll go back to the point I said initially, that the Jersey Medical Center, that had a great deal of familiarity with him as well, arrived at the scene first, and they're the ones that contacted the Jersey City Police Department because they felt unsafe. And so, you know, the footage is very, very clear. There is nobody else on the door other than Jersey City Police Department that was wearing body cameras. And that is the reason why we wanted to do this morning and urge the immediate release of those body camera footage. We didn't want the public to second guess the decisions that we made, and to understand that we're always prioritizing wellness of our residents and the police officers that answer those calls. And I think that the body camera speaks to that.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is in 2011, when he was the victim of a previous shooting, when force had to be used against him, like in this one, again, it was the mobile crisis team that called the police department to the scene because they felt they could not interact safely with him.
We had 7 calls for service.
Yeah, there were 7 calls for service in the month of August,
Not Saturday, to my knowledge.
but I don't think Saturday was one. But they were each individual surrounding similar type of issues, maybe not to the same degree of this, and certainly not arising to the fact where the medical center called the Jersey City Police Department and felt that it was unsafe for them to handle the call by themselves.
2 weeks earlier, though, we had removed him safely to the medical center. The address. We'll assume it's the same gentleman. He lives, as far as we know, he lives there alone.
Is there going to be a look at the tactics that were used yesterday to determine what would have been done differently that would allow them?
Yeah, we have been doing that since the incident happened. Myself, Director Moody, and Chief Flora spent all of yesterday going over every piece of body camera footage. The taser also has footage that was deployed. So this entire incident is on video. Yeah.
If the incident went in a different direction, that he hadn't communicated with us for some time, for a couple minutes after saying potentially harming himself or somebody else, and we didn't enter the door, and at that point he harmed himself or somebody else and they had bled out in that situation, the conversation would have been today, why did we not enter after an hour and all of those things manifesting themselves. At the time of the incident, the Jersey Police Department has to make a decision based on their protocol and based on the communications and based on history on what's in best interest of both the resident, anybody potentially in there, and the police department at the time. When you look at the footage of actually what transpired, you'd be hard-pressed to say that we could have taken a different approach. They arrived at the scene based on the medical center's advice. They entered, or they went to the door and communicated with Mr. Washington for close to an hour, despite the fact that he was saying things at the time that were very, very erratic. Very erratic. They breached the door but did not enter, and then they were charged at by Mr. Washington with a knife, and they released a taser, which is clearly seen in the video, as well as the firearm. And so if you look at the set of protocols and you say the police department could have acted differently under those circumstances, we would be having a press conference the same, where you're asking us, why did we not enter the building after somebody so erratic was saying something that they could have harmed somebody else as well as themselves, and their circumstances could have been different. This is a tragedy, no question, because somebody lost their life. And I think that Director Shea said it accurately. I mean, our hearts go out to the family, and certainly we are very, very grieved to see anybody lose their life here. But I think when you look at the incident and the circumstances, you'd be hard-pressed to say that the medical center and the Jersey Police Department could have acted differently in this situation.
The trained officers from the emergency service unit, I'm trained myself. I'm an emergency psychiatric technician also. I reviewed everything they did, and they attempted to establish rapport. They attempted to find family members who could speak to him unsuccessfully. They asked him if he'd rather speak to medical people. They They tried to find other officers who might have had a previous relation with him, but the officer himself spoke compassionately, spoke caringly to him, constantly reassured him that we were only there to make sure he was okay. I'm very comfortable with the tactics we used. I just wish they had ended differently, like they do almost every other time. And unfortunately, I said before, Mr. Washington is sick. He is not responsible for his actions. He's not bad, he's sick, he's ill, he's mentally ill. But that does not make him less dangerous, and that's the problem with these jobs for us, and whoever you want for us. So a taser is a less lethal device. It can still cause death and it can also fail. But it's one of the tools in our toolbox, just like verbal de-escalation, the use of shields to try to protect ourselves. In this case, after reviewing the body camera, on a small, tiny landing, being rushed by someone with a knife, everything happened in a second. So there was no time to attempt to deploy a taser. Again, these officers handle over 2,000 jobs like this a year. They had the taser there. They tested it ahead of time. It's all captured on video. They're ready to use the de-escalation. They're covering, and unfortunately, events played out differently.
Yeah, and I would just add that this was not on the ground floor. There were stairs directly beyond the landing. There was a very small landing and stairs beyond that. There were 2 officers there that were communicating as the front with Mr. Washington. Once they were rushed, there was nowhere for them to go. The stairs were directly behind them. There was no way for them to retreat and exit the building. There was nowhere for them to go.
Yeah, that would be a question for the medical center or the psychiatric personnel. I bow to no one in my wish that there was better medical care for for mentally ill people in this country, so that my officers were not placed in this position, and that the people were taken care of better. I have also experienced friends and family that have psychological issues. We all wish that there was better care for them.
Yeah. We haven't, I haven't communicated yet with the Attorney General directly. We go through a protocol where we submit all of the information, the body cameras, everything we have. Look, I think that, while I haven't interacted with him in this sort of setting, he's done a very, very good job and been very fair and reasonable to police departments and the public over his tenure. And the one thing I would hope is that there's a quick release of the video so that the public can see it. What we've seen in the past is sometimes with previous attorney generals is that it could take a long time, and that's where the public has distrust over what transpired. We would like to see this released almost immediately. There's no witnesses to the incident beyond the body camera because it was a tight, as we said, a tight landing and a stairs. So there was Mr. Washington and the footage of the body cameras and the tasers, and we were comfortable in letting the public decide what transpired and how the police officers acted in that situation. So we just urge a quick release of it. The investigation doesn't entail many interviews beyond that. So our hope is that this would be released to the public as soon as possible. This was late last night, and we have not yet. And what prompted us looking to answer all these questions was clearly we didn't want this to go in a direction where people have mistrust or don't hear kind of what transpired via the videos. There was nobody in that apartment other than us at the time, and sometimes when these, the media picks up a conversation or questions by a family and it spins in a sideways direction, and we wanted to make sure that the public has trust in the work that we do. We feel that our officers acted properly, although a tragic set of circumstances, they did follow proper training in every way.
Were there members of the crisis intervention team on site dispatched by the Bramhall Avenue?
Yeah.
Is it necessary for them to leave
You can clearly see on the body cameras of the police officers that when they arrive, that the medical center is on the scene and they are at the entrance to the building, but don't feel comfortable in entering the building. That is all very, very clear to see on the police officers' body cameras. And then the police officers enter the building initially. The body cameras face forward, so I couldn't tell you what's behind them, you know? But what I can tell you is that you could see the medical center on the scene prior to them arriving, standing at the entrance to the building, waiting for the police officers to enter. So,
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is that there's kind of a mistaken impression, I think, that we can bring psychiatrists to all of these jobs and have them talk to the person or lead the person. We can only introduce an unarmed civilian into this job if the area is secure. And in this case, it was not secure. The medical center made that determination themselves before they even called us, that they couldn't safely interact with Mr. Washington. We're on a tiny landing with him, and God forbid, had there been an unarmed civilian up there when he rushed out, they would have been very badly hurt. So that's the reason this entire conversation about, yes, it helps if they can come. We like their advice. They help us. They can sometimes give advice, but they can't be up there leading this unless we already have a secure situation. Once we secure it, then we can introduce them.
yeah, we'll do one more question. Yep.
It turned out no.
No. No. Yeah.
We believe, and again, we have not conducted interviews, the Attorney General's doing their investigation, but from what we can hear on the body camera, it's fairly clear that the captain and sergeant making the decisions were concerned that he had either hurt himself or that he had hurt someone else in the apartment, that we did not know. Remember, we showed up and the door was locked with him acting irrationally inside, so we did not know if there was anyone else inside there or not. Immediately upon him being taken into custody, unfortunately injured, they entered and searched for anybody who might be hurt in there and had negative results. So we now know it's not true.
Last question. Yeah.
Tawana, you want to take it?
So with the officers that's on scene, they're doing okay. Right now, that's where they'll be placed again until the Attorney General is finished with their investigation. They make the determination of where we go, but as of right now, they're okay. And in the best state that you could, because again, our condolences to the Washington family, but no cop is ever happy about deploying their weapon. So for as good as I can say that part, when I was at the hospital, he's okay for right now, and then the state of mind until they're finished with their interviews. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, it is very traumatic. There's protocols around all of this. The first and most important thing is to allow the Attorney General to do their investigation, but they will be afforded someone to speak to, for lack of a better term, before they return to work, and actually the chief and the director would mandate that they do that before they come back to work.
Okay. Yes. The call to us came from the medical center, okay? So what's important is that, and this goes to some of the questions that came in this morning to the press team and some of the assertions by people who live in the area or family members. The call came in from the medical center that felt it was unsafe. So I couldn't tell you who called in to the medical center, but I could tell you that the Jersey City Police Department responded because the medical center asked us to respond, and that's an important point. Okay? Thank you all for coming out today. Appreciate it. Thanks. Okay.